All right, I think we can get started now that a lot of people have joined. So good morning or afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us today. Very big welcome, especially to all of our donors, but of course to everybody who's joining from Australia and New Zealand and elsewhere in the world. I'm Isaac Chesters and I'll be introducing our webinar today. Let me firstly begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet today. For myself, that's the peoples of the Yugambeh region of southeast Queensland, and for our office in Sydney, it's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people attending today. So yeah, I'm Isaac Chesters. I'll be just briefly introducing the webinar today before handing over to Tahir, and then we're going to answer a few questions together at the end as well. I'm currently up on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia, but most recently I was a finance and HR manager at the MSF Kamrangachar project, which is in Dhaka city in Bangladesh. I was there for just under a year, and before that I was a field departures coordinator in our MSF Sydney office from roughly the start of 2019. So I've been with MSF for a couple of years now in a couple of different roles, but that's certainly a lot less time than Tahir, and in fact a lot less than many other MSF staff, some of whom will be here today. So it's an honour to be able to introduce this webinar to you all today. So as all of you would know already, the theme of today's webinar is Pass the Mic. And the idea behind that is that as supporters of MSF, you very often hear from staff from Australia and New Zealand, like myself, about our experiences in MSF's projects worldwide, but also our perspectives on MSF's work and our perspectives on humanitarian aid generally. But it's not often that supporters are able to hear from our locally hired staff members directly, which is a significant thing because in fact around 90% of our field workforce is from the countries in which we work, which leaves just a small 10% for our international staff like myself, which is a small minority. For example, in the Kamrangachar project, from where I recently returned, we had approximately 140 staff in our project, give or take, including locally hired and international staff. But of that 140, there were only about ranging from 1 to a maximum of 7 international staff while I was there. So even at that max capacity, international staff were a small part of our workforce and certainly far less than that 10% in that case. And on top of that, our MSF locally hired staff, they're usually very much at the coalface of what we do in MSF. They're usually at the front line of providing care for patients. And during the COVID pandemic, this has been even more the case. The very extremely challenging travel restrictions and other restrictions that we've had to endure, and the many urgent needs relating to COVID and other health crises have meant that our locally hired health, logistics and administrative staff have been more crucial to our work than ever before. So it's very fair to say, I think, that our locally hired staff are absolutely critical for the delivery of our medical projects worldwide. And back here in Australia and New Zealand, we perhaps don't recognise enough this disproportionate role that our locally hired staff do play in the implementation of our social mission worldwide. I can only speak for myself, but I can say that it's very easy to lose that perspective being back here in Australia or New Zealand. When I was working in the field HR team in Sydney, of course, the focus of my role was to assist our Kiwi and Aussie international staff members as much as possible. And the field HR team in Sydney does a brilliant job in doing that, in taking care of our international staff. But it is important to keep in mind that they make up just a small fraction of our global workforce in the field. So I guess the overall point of this Pass the Mic webinar today is to try to rebalance that perspective a little bit by giving voice and giving space to locally hired staff who are the majority of what MSF is today. So with all that in mind, on our 50-year anniversary, which is this year, MSF Australia is really grateful to have this opportunity to pass the mic to one of our locally hired staff members, Tahir, so that you can hear directly about his experiences with MSF. And just to introduce our relationship briefly, while I was a finance and HR manager in the Kamrangachar project, Tahir, for the most part, filled the role of project coordinator support, which is sort of like the right-hand man of the project coordinator who's overall in charge of the project. And also for a couple of months, he filled in as the project coordinator. So he's been both my colleague and my direct manager while I was in Bangladesh. So, and I won't steal Tahir's thunder and talk too much about the project, but We worked very closely together in Bangladesh. We solved a great many challenging problems together. It was a delight to work with him in Bangladesh, and it's certainly my pleasure now to introduce him to all of you. So please, Tahir, a big welcome. And I'll hand over to you to firstly tell us a bit about yourself and your journey with MSF so far.
Thank you, Isaac. And first of all, I would like to thank all of the people who are watching this webinar, our donors and other participants. So thanks to you all. I am Mohammad Abu Tahir. I work MSF in Monitor. I started my journey with MSF around 10 years ago. So I remember it was like the time I started, it was kind of funny because, you know, I had no knowledge of MSF before, and I saw some people with white shirt and logo, a red color logo, was like roaming around in my area, and they're going different pharmacies and other areas. So I thought, okay, who are they? So I saw the logo, and then I Googled it, and I found it's an international humanitarian organization. And then suddenly one of my friends, you know, said, okay, they are recruiting. Are you interested? I said, okay, let's try. And then I started with MSF. I remember that day still. It's like 6th of March 2011. So it's 10 years now. And yeah, since then it's a journey, and I am proud of, you know, like I'm part of this journey with MSF. And in my 10 years, I have been in different roles for MSF. I started my journey as outreach team leader, like going different door-to-doors to our patient, and then as project coordinator support and operation. Yeah, that's my 10 years now, and yeah. And to talk about you, because, you know, like many of the people who are here may not know Manager or the activities of Bangladesh that MSF are doing. So Kamlakichar is an area which is around 4 square kilometer area, but with a population around 1 million. So you can think it's a very small area, but it's an overcrowded, you know, populated area. And this used to be a very rural area in the past, and then, you know, when time goes, then people from different areas outside Dhaka city started coming to Dhaka for many different reasons, economic and in Bangladesh, we have also river erosion. So for many different reasons, people start to come to the city areas. And Kamaraipur is an area where, you know, the rent of the place is low. They have many working opportunities. So it's like full of people right now. And there are hundreds of factories here in Kamaraipur. It's like very urban area now. And MSF has started its activities for focusing the adolescent girls. We have programs for like sexual and reproductive health for adolescent girls up to 20, where we provide medical consultation, mental health consultation, ANC, PNC, family planning, EPI, and other sexual and reproductive services. We also have activities for survivors of gender-based violence. And we have another unique program, which is occupational health services, where we provide care for different factory workers, where a factory worker can be 8, 10 years old and or up to 50 above age. So this is the activities that we have, and in the past we were also active in providing care for the tannery workers as well. And then MSF has also huge program in our Cox's Bazar region, especially Cox's Bazar and Teknaf areas, where we provide care for Rohingya population and also host population. So we have around 9 different projects in Cox's Bazar. And one of the biggest projects that we have is the Kutubala project that's been there for quite some time. Even before the start of Rohingya influx, we are there providing care for the Rohingya population and host population. Since 2017, after the big influx, there was a huge need, and MSF also involved in activities in that area. And fortunately, I had the privilege to work both in language and Kotsuppala area. And recently, I have been there in our Kotsuppala project where we have huge secondary hospital for we provide different varieties of services there, and it's very interesting, as Bangladeshi person going there to volunteer, seeing and yet in your own eyes how vulnerable situation those people are living, and it's imagine an area where we have 1 million people who came from Myanmar, and I'd like to thank also the Bangladesh government that Bangladesh was generous to accepting this nearly 1 million people who came from Myanmar, and the support and structures that all the government and the other organization and MSF is providing. And like I mentioned about Cox's Bazar, going there, seeing the population, they're living in very unhygienic condition, which makes them in a vulnerable position in different outbreaks, waterborne disease, respiratory disease, and skin disease. So for that, in Cox's Bazar, we have this. Care where we have specialized secondary health care for the neonatal and pediatric services. It's a 24/7 care where we have different surgical activities as well in that care. So and we provide vaccination, and not only outside but inside the camp area for those people, and we also provide mental health care for is in Cox's Bazar, especially pediatric areas for our patients in both our leaders and host communities. Yeah, so this is more about language but as I can see, as a national staff, I have not only working in Kamrangicha, but also I have worked with. I had the privilege to work and see the bigger movement of NSF activities, and I was able to support our activities outside Bangladesh. One of them was our activities from the Mediterranean Sea. So it was migration is one of the biggest challenge right now the world is seeing, and as you mentioned, actors also we are seeing. So it was a great experience for me going there, seeing other kinds of activities outside Bangladesh, and seeing Mediterranean Sea is a sea that I have never seen in my life. Like, yeah, we have Cox's Bazar, one of the longest sea beach and sea, but Mediterranean was completely different. And when the sea is rough, it can be very dangerous. And it was seeing that I see like people are traveling in just a small rubber boat, and it's like it is something that like you cannot uh, we were in the Mediterranean Sea. Even we had a very big boat, and when the sea was rough, it was like we all like having like okay, the sea is rough, and seeing these small rubber boats, people are traveling like for me it's a deadly sea. I'd say for them, like we're traveling, especially a small rubber boat, and I can tell one story from there. It's that's also kind of shocking and a different experience for me. So uh, we were there and we are like when we see some boat in distress, we go, we rescue. And in this picture, you see like we have small boat that we have medical people who always go like uh, some people who are responsible to rescue, and we always have medical people from MSF to go and look who is the most sick people so that they can like rescue them first and provide the medical care. So we found a boat. There were around 154, 55 people around, and there's only one female. If I remember. And the female was pregnant, and she delivered on that uh, rubber boat that you will see in the pictures. Other people are male, so no one really taking care. And sometimes they sit in a way that you cannot even know. So she delivered the baby on this rubber boat on this Mediterranean Sea, and our doctors go there, find the mother who just delivered and rescued. So because she delivered on this rubber boat, no midwives were there, no other doctors were there to provide care. So the placenta cord was still attached, and then from this small boat, when we rescue, she had to come to our boat, like a big one, and then she had to climb. And it was difficult because, then the mother was holding the baby in one hand, climbing up. And I saw the mother was bleeding, the placenta cord was still attached. And for around, I remember, it's like for a few minutes I couldn't even talk, like seeing that scenario. And then you imagine like what could drive them in that situation to move for a better life. So for me, I felt like at that moment, like our presence, not only saved that 150 for other people, but also saved those mother and that young baby who just born to this new world that we live in. So for me, we in day-to-day life, we save our like the life of our patients. And like I said, this was quite a different experience for me. And I also had many other good experience for MSF while I'm working. So I'm not a doctor or a medical person. I'm a non-medical person. So I am not there every single day giving consultations, saving lives directly. But indirectly, I feel like I'm saving lives every single day. Like even most of our jobs, like it's like external relationship and other things. So and safety and security, networking and access for our beneficiaries. That's my day-to-day job. But in a way, like working in different projects with different positions, I always have this feeling, like every single day when our staff, our medical staff, and people are saving lives, I'm part of them. And when I'm talking about staff, you see, majority of our staff are national staff, and like even in Bangladesh, we have around 2,000 NSS here. And the number of international staff are very low. Even the project that I am in, Combined is like we have 135 people, and among them only 6 international staff. All our medical doctors are national staff. All our nurses and midwives are national staff who are, day-to-day basis providing the medical consultation to our patients. And so, for me, they all are MSFers. They are the MSF, and because of all our national staff and all our people, I feel proud that our presence, our activities has some impacts. We are saving lives. So yeah, it's and for me, I'd also like to thank this donor and everyone, not only in Kunagicha, but all other MSF projects. So. Yeah, it's thank you from my side. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tahir. I've heard you present so many times now, but I learn something new every time. So thanks a lot. But I just have, before we move on to the audience questions, I just had a question for you. You were speaking about, the disproportionate role that locally hired staff do play. But I wonder if you could reflect on what it's like, because of course, for international staff, we're just visitors to these places. We're there temporarily. So I wonder if you could reflect on what it's like to be working within your own community on these health challenges.
So for me, it's the international. I would not say it's like visitors, but I would say sometimes it's the international staff, that they're training to local staff is also really helpful. And for me, I am from Kamrangicha. So when working for MSF in Kamrangicha, working for my community people, it's something really please me. It's like a food for my soul, that I am being able to part to help my community in ways, and different people are taking care. So I it's been 10 years and I have so many stories that I've been part. So I remember one day we had before we had meditation project in Kamrangicha, and in Kamrangicha no one really had any idea about what meditation is. So MSF is the first one training, providing care, medical care regarding malnutrition, and providing education to our outreach team that malnutrition is a disease and you need to take care of and how to manage nutrition. So I remember one child who was almost dying and came to MSF clinic, took the care, and then after 3 years later, the father came with the boy, and he looked healthy, alhamdulillah. And the father at that time told that because of you and MSF, because at that time I was like I mentioned that I was in the outreach team, so we are the one giving them the information that you go to MSF clinics. So, and then after 3 years later, when the father came and said, because of you and MSF, my son is still alive. So that is a feeling I cannot really describe in words. So, and that man is from this community. So it's something really special, and it's some feelings even though I cannot describe in words. So it's for me it's really special that being a boy from Kamrangicha is able to provide care for the population. And not only in Kamrangicha, but also, like I mentioned, I worked in Cox's Bazar. Even though it's a short time, but I feel like I could be part of, providing care for my own population in my country. So it's something special.
Yeah, absolutely. And to change the topic a little bit, Tahir, I know you've said you've worked with MSF for around 10 years now, which is of course a long time. And this year, MSF has reached our 50-year anniversary. So would you be able to comment a bit on, I guess, what that 50 years means to you?
As when I started MSF and the second month I worked joined MSF in March, and in April we had a field associative debate. So it was the first experience for me to know MSF associative nature as well. And then it was also very interesting because all the staff were present. And then they were discussing about MSF, how we can do better. So in Bangladesh, I have never seen that practice before joining MSF, of course, those who are in the higher management position in different corporate boards, they are part of, growth of their companies or organization. But at that moment, I felt like, okay, everyone is being a part, and then there was some sort of voice, for staff. And that inspired me to join MSF Association. And then since then, I am a part of MSF Association, and especially in the South Asian region. I'm also one of the associative focal points, especially for combined project. So I am really excited about this MSF's 15 years celebration. And for me, we have born 1971. It's been long years now. The time we born and the time now, it's quite changed. The emergency situation that we have experienced at that time may not be the same that we are seeing right now. And the challenges that we are seeing and facing every single time. And it's even like last year when COVID started, so there were some challenges, supply issues, our staff transportation issues, and other challenges. So for me, we are quite a big organization now, and we are doing, from my perspective, we are doing some very good work in different areas, but still, we have a long way to go. So for me, I am very excited about 50 years, and I think it is time we reflect ourselves as well as ourselves, like how we can improve, how we can provide better care to our patients, and so both internally and externally. So I think this is, for me, 50 years means that we should reflect ourselves and look at how we and how we can improve. So for me, there's always a space for improvement. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a critical part of MSF for the last 50 years and going into the future is, of course, our supporters. So perhaps now is a good point to move on to some of the questions that we did receive from the supporters that we can now hope to answer. Tahir, do you have the first question there? I think you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, someone said the voice was not good, so I'm really sorry I couldn't manage to check the chat. So no, I can't see the questions, Jack. So
no problem. I've got them here. And yeah, the audio was a little bit rough at the start, but it seems to be getting better, so all good. But look, one of the questions we did receive from the audience beforehand was about mental health, so regarding our staff and our patients. So the question relating to our staff was, and I'll read it out, having witnessed so many harrowing situations for displaced families in places like Cox's Bazar, how do you handle your feelings and stresses surrounding their plight? So Tahir, I'll hand over to you in a second just to talk about Cox's Bazar, as I didn't work in Cox myself, but I can definitely comment generally on staff mental health within MSF, just putting my HR hat on for a moment. Because I'll say firstly that within MSF, it is something that's taken very seriously, and there are dedicated teams of staff who are specifically there to help out our staff with their mental health. So internal programs such as the psychosocial care unit exists there as an internal confidential service that's always available for any staff member within MSF. And as Tahir said, neither of us are medical, but the true value that I see in a service like this is that because it's internal, they do really understand what it's like to work for MSF in the field, whereas, you know, an external counsellor may not. So MSF does have those internal programs set up to really support our staff in the field, and that's locally hired and international staff. But aside from that, I would say that, you know, while the contexts in which we work can be extremely challenging, a lot of it, I think, does come down to creating a healthy work environment and ensuring that you've got good relationships with your colleagues, especially in the most arduous of conditions. Because I do feel that, you know, if you like who you work with and you feel like you're part of a really strong team, which of course MSF tries to foster, then you can handle almost anything in the field. And of course, our managers are trained and expected to build that sort of team atmosphere and to build that team dynamic. So, and of course, aside from the fact that taking care of our staff is just the right thing to do, taking care of their mental health is the right thing to do, from a really pragmatic perspective, it's also the case that burnt out staff are not able to help the communities that we're aiming to serve. So I think it's absolutely in everyone's best interests if we're taking care of the mental health of our staff. And finally, the last thing I would say, and this is not specifically about Cox, but about working with MSF generally, you know, self-care is such an important aspect. If you go back a few decades, I think self-care was just wearing the right personal protective equipment. But, you know, self-care now for our workers in the field means playing a really active role in taking care of their own mental health. So all those things together, you know, exist to support the mental health of our staff members. But I can say now, having worked for MSF for a few years, that the attitude towards mental health is very serious, and the health of our staff is taken really seriously. So Tahi, I don't know if you can comment specifically on working in the projects near Cox.
So for me, you know, mental health is something, you know, like we are talking like almost every single time. It's really a good question. And the way I see it, MSF has a psychosocial care unit for its staff. So whoever wishes to talk with the department, the psychosocial care department, they can. And especially in Bangladesh, recently what we have, MSF is also providing is they have a like mental health consultant or someone. So they, like, even last week, one of the mental health consultant came and they provided the information to all the staff in Kazakhstan and Cox's Bazar. So now we have like two consultants who, like, the staff can access. So for me, you know, like there is some opportunities for staff who wish to, you know, talk to someone, anybody they can. And in a day-to-day basis, you know, like it's a very good question, and then sometimes it's very stressful, you know, for our staff, especially when we are in Cox's Bazar. And so self-care is really important, and it's good to see that, you know, MS is also focusing this. And like I mentioned, we have this consultant who is coming, informing people that they have these services available for our staff as well.
Great, thank you. And another question we received is a bit more about patient mental health, which I know is tricky for you to answer as you're non-medical, but I'll read out a question which was, how do you help people to understand the effects of their trauma? So perhaps Tahir, if you could talk about the mental health services that we do provide.
So, you know, like patient trauma, because I'm not a medical person, and so it's mostly for our mental health team. But I'd like to mention that in all our projects, we have mental health team. So even in Kazakhstan, when we started for especially medical care and mental health care for survivors of violence, sexual violence. But now, because mental health is a care that we feel that it should be accessible for all. So not only in Kabrangicha but in Kosis Bazaar in our project. So anyone who wish to talk to a counselor, any patient, they can directly go and they get the mental health care. So, and I see the changes, like when we started mental health care, no one in Kabrangicha project in urban area in Bangladesh. So no one really, even some of our own staff had doubt what is mental health, like I'm talking about, like 8 years back. So now everyone, our staff is recognized and our patients are recognizing the services and they are accessing. So, and like I mentioned, we have good access, like patient who just came to talk to a counselor for their mental health, they can go directly to talk. So it doesn't mean that you just need a medical need to go. You can come and get access. So we have mental health department in all our projects.
Thanks, Tahir. And another question we received, to change the topic slightly, you were speaking earlier, of course, about how in our Kamarangachar project, the vast majority of our medical doctors and our medical staff generally are locally hired. And the question we received was, does MSF involve itself in the training of local doctors? So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yes. In general, we are, in different times, we are providing trainings to different other organizations and Ministry of Healthcare. So I remember, like when COVID started last year, in 2020, we have provided some training to hospital staff. Even if someone doesn't mean that I can provide training only to doctors. So we have provided trainings to even payments regarding the infection prevention and control because we implementing training. It's not only monitor but it's also that I have seen like our team is providing trainings to different list of health staff and organizations. Yes, we do provide organizations to other organizations.
Thanks. Yeah, and I do just want to hijack this question slightly because it is an HR related question, just to talk a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on HR, because the first thing that jumps into our minds when we think about the impact of COVID on MSF's work is of course medical, and of course the medical impacts were huge, but something that can be overlooked was the really massive impact that the pandemic had on HR. And I really mean, every level of HR within MSF was drastically affected by COVID. Firstly, just getting our international staff to and from the field became an enormous challenge. And that's already a very complex task. So what was already a very complex system with a lot of moving parts, getting our international staff to and from the field just, was launched onto a new level of complexity. And as many of you would already know, getting flights back into Australia and New Zealand, but particularly Australia over the last year has just been a huge challenge. So getting our staff home was very difficult, but also getting them to the field, getting things like visas became super difficult because consulates and embassies were shutting down. And of course, some countries were closing their borders entirely or just changing their rules regarding entry, changing the visa rules. And a lot of those changes were happening very quickly and with not very, very good communication. So it really became a very complex task from an HR perspective. And we certainly felt that in the field. As I mentioned earlier, at one point we had just one international staff member in the project. And we can't blame that all on COVID, but for sure, COVID made the system of moving international staff around a lot more complicated. And also, on the other side, it really hit our locally hired staff as well, because, our projects did continue to function during the pandemic and we continued to provide care. And of course, it hardly needs to be said that for many staff, this was immensely stressful. But on top of that, staffing in the field became very, very difficult, as if our staff contracted COVID or were close contacts, then they were not able to work in the clinics, of course. So we dealt with challenging staff shortages and we had to very delicately balance the needs of the communities that we're serving and also the needs of our staff, which typically are not things we're willing to compromise on. So for sure the HR challenges, which are sometimes overlooked, were immense during the pandemic. But I will say that, during that time, during these huge challenges for our staff, staff really stepped up at every level of the organization. So from the bottom of the top, people stepped up and went above and beyond to make sure that our projects could continue running, which I think is a great sign for the future. And I think that does bring us to, the $1 million question, which we did receive from the audience, which was, and Tahir, I'll read it out. MSF has faced so many challenges over the past 50 years. When looking forward, what do you think will create the biggest barriers to the organization in being able to deliver its services? Conflict and war, climate change, repressive governments, funding, or another pandemic? So Tahir, I'll hand that one over to you firstly.
For me, it's every challenge is a challenge. It's like for me, like I said, we are saving lives and we are facing different challenges. And I already mentioned that the time we are born and the challenges and emergencies that we have seen. I was not there at that time, but I feel like we are facing different challenges every single time. And MSF is an international organization working in more than 60 countries. And everywhere I feel like there are different challenges that MSF is facing. And climate change is of course, biggest issue, but for me, I can say that MSF is also, thinking about this year also within our medical program. So we are discussing more environment. Because we are here in the language of the environment and computational issues here. So for me, all the challenges are challenges that we are facing every single time. So I don't know, it's like which one is the biggest one, but for me, many of these challenges is the challenge. So, yeah, and like I mentioned, the environmental health, and I'm very excited because it's also part of climate change, So yeah, so I'm excited, especially in this environment. And in different areas like in war zones and other areas, migration is one of the biggest issues and challenges that we are seeing every single time in Bangladesh, in Europe, and other areas of the Mediterranean Sea. So yeah, and like I don't know what you're following, like in the Mediterranean, we're also facing challenges in different times. So yeah, we are facing different challenges, I would say. So which one is the biggest challenge in 50 years? I cannot, answer, because for me, I see every challenge in a challenge. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to know what's coming around the corner. But with those challenges in mind, Tahir, what would you say? It might be a tricky question to answer, but what would you say is your hope? I guess at this 50-year point of MSF's history, what's your hope for the future of MSF?
My hope is personally, I always try to be positive in my personal life, and everything I try to be positive. So even in MSF, my hope is that it's the patient, doesn't matter who they are, where we are working, should have there shouldn't be any barrier for patients to access our services. And like I mentioned, we are facing different challenges. So for me, my hope that because MSF is there where there is a big need, and then if there are challenges and if people cannot access, that's the difference. So for me, it's like wherever my hope is that wherever we go and work, our patients should have good access. So and we are working in different, whenever we face challenges, we work working. But I hope like there shouldn't be any challenges like for whenever any patient should need the services, they'll have it. And I believe that we are working constantly and we will continue this good work in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and to offer my own perspective on that, yeah, I think as you say, the most honest answer is that we don't know what the biggest challenge is going to be. We don't know what's hiding around the corner. But with all of these things looming, with climate change, criminalization of aid, and some more suspect ways in which countries are choosing to interpret international law these days, it's very clear that those extrinsic challenges are going to be huge. But I think, an alternative perspective, which is one that we'll need to take seriously, is that I think some of the biggest challenges that MSF will face will be intrinsic as well as extrinsic. As the humanitarian space does grow more and more complex, which seems inevitable, MSF will need to continue to adapt to this so that we remain a flexible, adaptable, efficient, and fit for purpose organization for a different world with different problems and challenges. So I think especially at this 50-year point in our history, we look back and MSF has done incredible things in the last 50 years, but of course we can't shy away from constant reassessment, self-appraisal, so that we're continuously reforming ourselves to be the best MSF that we can be, to continue to best help the communities we serve. So in my opinion anyway, I think that will mean taking really seriously things like, our international governance and organizational structure, the way we use technology in the field, and also, current movements in the aid space, working out what they mean for us. For example, things like the localization agenda and the decolonization of aid movement. So, my perspective is that all of these intrinsic challenges will need to be considered very carefully if we're to remain excellent at what we do going into the future. But in my few years with MSF, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that MSF's very good at constructive self-criticism. So I do feel, very confident that we'll continue to adapt to this changing world. But for sure, it's going to be a big challenge for the organization.
I do agree, I see like in different times MSF adapt to this situation. Even last year, like when we had supply chain challenges, like many of the national staff, adapted and they were, supportive. So for me personally, I supported coordinator support and during that time, supported coordinator in different projects, but like I agree that analysis the future to adapt in different situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, inherent to all of that is, the support of our donors worldwide. And we did just have one more, just a fun question from the audience, which was, and I'll just read it out, was what is the most delicious meal you've ever eaten in Bangladesh and how is it prepared? So for me, that's an easy one because I love the food in Bangladesh, and I've been showing off my new tolerance for spicy food now that I'm back home. But possibly my favorite thing about Bangladesh, of course, aside from my colleagues, was mishti, which is what Bangladeshi sweets are called. And I was completely obsessed with mishti while I was in Bangladesh, which was my, not so healthy form of self-care. But really, Bangladeshi mishti is incredible. So if you do find yourself in Bangladesh, make sure you make it to a local sweet shop. Tahir, as you are Bangladeshi, I guess that's quite a difficult question for you to answer.
For me, I don't know, like we have different food, and especially in different regions we have different, but for me, personally, I like meat. I'm a meat lover, and so for me, steak is something that I love most. So yeah, for me, it's a steak.
Traditional Bangladeshi meal, steak.
Not really, but yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, thank you. That was the questions that we had ready to respond to today. So we do just want to end on a note to say thank you to our donors. So of course, everything that Tahir has spoken about today, his work in Bangladesh, and in the Mediterranean. None of that's possible without the support of our donors. So thank you very much. We're extremely grateful for the support that you have provided for many years and that you continue to provide to MSF. So thank you very much. And Tahir, any comments on that?
No, for me, I'd like to thank you all, our donors, all the participants. So for me, it's just thank you. It's like I thank you all. It's because without you, I don't think this is possible that it would have been possible for us to save lives. So for me, it's a big thank you.
Great. Thank you. So we'll wrap it up there. I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. And yeah, please make sure to come to the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.